Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. YouTubers are running out of time to cash in their chips. Kiely Rodni's autopsy was completed on August 23rd, almost 4 weeks ago now. The toxicology is also complete. Now, during that autopsy, her remains were identified, but also her cause and manner of death would have been noted. Do you think the autopsy report will say accident or foul play or inconclusive? Any autopsy done 16 days post-mortem is going to be limited, particularly in that most crucial area, time of death. An autopsy isn't going to narrow down the time of death to minutes or hours. Instead, it'll be a matter of days. That brings us to a tweet put up not that long ago by an ex-FBI agent. There's been some speculation that the absence of a date of death means something, quote, extremely interesting, end quote. It could, because if you aren't really paying attention, it appears this flyer not only came out on the Instagram and Facebook accounts of Kiely's family, but did so on September 5th, which suggests whoever made the flyers saw the Adventures with Purpose video on September 2nd, accepted Kiely may have been alive as long as a half day later, and thus left the date blank. Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. Also bear in mind where you're getting your information. Is it credible? Think about that. And let's get started. As I've stressed in the previous video, if the vehicle telematics are recoverable, the vehicle telematics ought to tell us when the vehicle was last driven, which would also narrow down Kiely's final moments. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the vehicle telematics could actually trump the toxicology in terms of time of death. But even if the telematics aren't retrievable, the fact that Kiely's phone went silent at around 12:33 on August 6th is really our biggest clue, in my opinion. If Kiely was alive for even 1 hour after this plausible time of death, and if her vehicle was still on terra firma an hour later, then she had a charger. We know she had a charger in the vehicle, and there's no reason it would not have been on, would not have pinged, or that she wouldn't have sent messages. Unless there was foul play. That does, of course, open a potential window to foul play. Did somebody take her phone? Did someone want to conceal her whereabouts by concealing her phone? If Kiely's phone is missing, then that does raise a legitimate red flag. Could she have tried to exit one of the windows of her vehicle using the phone as a light source, only for the phone to get wet and then get lost in the dark when that light source was extinguished? Is the phone actually still out there? Is it one of the final missing pieces that haven't been salvaged? Is it in the mud and the dirt where the vehicle was found? It's doubtful. If Kiely's phone was missing, would law enforcement have mentioned it? And would they have wanted the public to know such a legally sensitive detail? They didn't in the Chris Watts case, although we knew Shanann's phone was found in the loft area under couch cushions. That only came to light months later when the body cam was released. Now, there seems to be a lot of mystery and misunderstanding around autopsy reports and toxicology. Why are they holding it back? Why is it taking so long? Is this a sign that this is a serious investigation that's taking place? Why aren't law enforcement saying anything? And I think social media have exploited this knowledge gap while it exists to grow weeds within the narrative. One of those weeds is that Kiely likely wasn't intoxicated. They make this argument so that a foul play or murder scenario becomes more likely, because anyone who drives late at night in the pitch dark in very asymmetrical terrain while drunk will have an accident. So she needs to be not drunk so that something else happens. Several drivers who went to investigate the scene afterwards said that they had to be super careful that they didn't drive into the reservoir themselves either, even though they were sober, driving slowly, and knew where it was. Now, you can imagine if one of these members of the public did drive into the reservoir, could that have been foul play? Could it have been a serial killer that is sort of pushing multiple vehicles into the reservoir? There's a serial killer lurking around Prosser Lake. One of these drivers came perilously close to getting into trouble at night right beside the water. Is that because there was someone lurking around? So do you see, for as long as the toxicology results aren't available, social media can spin their tall tales, gather their gold coins, and pretend intoxication is completely irrelevant. Remember clue number 6, the sixth clue we all missed? Well, it reckons that intoxication is supremely relevant. And obviously, when you're talking about intoxication, toxicology is primarily trying to figure out what was going on there, how much intoxication, what kind of toxins were in a system. Now, we have confirmation, it came on September 12th, that the investigation is actually complete, right? Did you know that? Did you know that the investigation completed on September 12th? That is despite AWP's video coming out basically a week earlier. And so even though the investigation is complete, law enforcement are still waiting on Kiely Rodni's toxicology results, right? So it was complete, but there was no report that came out, no announcement. Why? Because the toxicology was still outstanding at that time. The toxicology is actually coming out very soon. You may have heard November 1st. No, it's not even going to be coming out in October, but actually even sooner. More news about that in a moment. Now, if we centered on the autopsy reports and toxicology, we want to know what's a normal turnaround time. Well, there's no better intertextuality than Anne Heche. Heche crashed in a horrible inferno at around 11 a.m. Friday, August 5th, less than 12 hours before Kiely Rodni and her vehicle disappeared at the Prosser Lake campground. It's also about 500 miles south of the Prosser Lake incident. It was in Los Angeles, I think the western LA. Now, after Heche's blue vehicle rammed into a 2-story home built in 1952, it took 59 firefighters an hour and 5 minutes to extinguish all the flames and rescue Anne Heche. And she was alive when they got to her. But I don't know if it means it took over an hour to rescue her or over an hour to completely extinguish the flames, or both. But one would imagine you can't safely rescue someone trapped inside a burning vehicle while it's still burning. Since we know Heche survived the inferno, it sounds like she was inside a burning wreck for a horribly long time, and the media reports from the time bear this out. One headline on page 6 read, Anne Heche was trapped in burning home for 45 minutes after crash. Records show. The Los Angeles Times had it as new audio reveals Anne Heche was trapped in fiery car for nearly an hour after crash. Heche lapsed into a coma, but less than a week after the accident, Heche was declared brain dead. Brain death is the legally accepted time when a person is considered no longer alive. Even if they are breathing, even if their hearts are beating, brain death is regarded as the moment a person is no longer alive. That's by the law. According to Deadline, quote, the coroner's office listed her date of death as August 11, the day she was declared brain dead at the Grossman Burn Center at West Hills Hospital and Medical Center, end quote. Autopsy and toxicology results were published in the media less than 6 days later. So, Deadline had the heading, Anne Heche's cause of death revealed by coroner report. And that came out August 17. So in Anne Heche's case, it took 12 days since the incident, less than 2 weeks, for the autopsy report to be made available, or less than a week after her death for the autopsy results to be made public. Now, it may sound counterintuitive, but the toxicology actually came back 6 days before the autopsy, and on the day Heche suffered brain death. That was August 11th. But the fact is, toxicology is a lot more straightforward to do when someone is alive. And Heche was alive when she arrived at the hospital. Think of toxicology when you're doing a breathalyzer or you're doing a blood glucose or cholesterol test. They don't need weeks. The results are virtually immediate. A breathalyzer can tell then and there whether you're intoxicated and by how much. So you might ask, why is there such a big difference between toxicology when you're alive and toxicology when you're not alive? Well, it's got to do with the half-life, the breakdown of chemicals post-mortem, and also the activating, the growth, the germination of other chemicals post-mortem, right? So they wouldn't have had to deal with cadaver-type substances in the way that toxicology must do. In other words, the toxicology's got to remove all of those aspects in order to see the original chemical substrate. Does that make sense? And there's also, to some extent, an interaction between some of those chemicals that were in situ to begin with and the chemicals that prosper and grow and develop and germinate over time. One's also got to, in a submarine environment where you're underwater, you've also got to deal with that aspect as something that is going to potentially interfere with the calculus of these chemical reactions. So it really is making kind of mathematical calculations of all the various drug and chemical possibilities, running those numbers, and that can really take quite a long time. Also, the longer the period that someone has been deceased, the more those chemical barriers and layers are that sort of stand in the way. So if there was more than 16 days in which Kiely had this buildup of substances, kind of in almost an artificial sense, then Anne Heche didn't have that at all. They were able to do toxicology immediately based on what they were seeing with the numbers that they could rely on. In Kiely's case, they've got to look beyond the numbers they're seeing and saying, well, how did these numbers congregate? How did they accumulate? Is that process normal? Is that process natural? Does that make sense? So what were the consequences of the toxicology? Well, in Heche's case, according to consequence.net, quote, law enforcement officials conducted a toxicology report from blood drawn at the hospital, and according to TMZ, Heche had cocaine in her system at the time of the accident. This was known sort of unambiguously, that she was definitely high on cocaine at the time of the accident. But then there was another aspect that wasn't clear. Bear in mind, she would have been in a lot of pain, with burn wounds and so on. And so the question is, if she was given fentanyl for pain, right? Did she already have fentanyl in her system? And how can you tell the difference between fentanyl applied at the hospital and fentanyl that she already had? That was an area that was quite murky and difficult to determine. In any event, I think what it suggests is drug impairment could actually be worse than driving drunk. But of course, driving drunk while impaired on drugs could be even worse. And that has a bearing on Kiely's case. Now you can imagine just how complicated the toxicology is if it's more than one substance. If there's alcohol plus magic mushrooms plus this plus that, and then all of that within the propagation of the ordinary cadaver substances that come out. Can you see how complicated it can actually get? To go back to consequence.net, quote, the blood sample also showed the presence of fentanyl. It's unclear at this time if the drug was administered by hospital staff after the crash or taken by Heche beforehand, end quote. So can you see, even in a fairly straightforward situation where they didn't have any of those post-mortem aberrations to deal with, there was still an element of uncertainty regarding Heche's toxicology. Can you see that? And that might also be the case with Kiely Rodni. So can you see just how sensitive and potentially complicated toxicology can be? And the reality is, even science right now can't predict what the outcomes could be of certain polysubstance scenarios, such as the combination of fentanyl and cocaine. What could that have on a person's cognitive processes? As far advanced as we are with so much medical technology at our fingertips, there are still some things we simply just don't know. We can't predict. One thing they do highlight is they say socially isolated folk are more likely to take fentanyl, which is why we've seen the spikes we have during the pandemic and post-pandemic period. Now, incredibly, despite what appeared to be a red flag and led to speculation that Heche had to have been drunk driving, it actually appears from her toxicology that she wasn't. There was no alcohol found in her system, right? No evidence of alcohol was found, and that's not going to be something that is in dispute or in doubt or questionable. If there's no alcohol found, there's no alcohol found. And I think that's notable because TMZ obtained a photo that seemed to show a bottle of alcohol in the cup holder of a Mini Cooper. I suppose it could also have been a bottle of water or just something she happened to be driving with. But it was unexpectedly, surprisingly, counterintuitively, it turned out the alcohol narrative was totally irrelevant. As a result of the toxicology report, Heche is actually being investigated for felony DUI. That's according to what the LAPD told CNN. Now, interestingly, on Sunday, August 14th, just 3 days after this investigation started, it was announced that it was closed. So as far as the LAPD were concerned, what had happened was quite simple and clear. Even though there was a little bit of a uncertainty regarding the fentanyl. I must also say once again that apologies for not syncing audio to images and so on. These are fairly long. This is fairly long analysis, and just to be clear, I've not really been getting that many views on these intertextuality episodes, so I'm also not going to go to a lot of trouble to do that. So I hope you guys are can forgive me for not putting that much effort in. That's basically the reason for that. So there's an article from Deadline dated August 13th saying, it's August 13th, saying Anne Heche's car crash is no longer being investigated by police. So let me ask you, do you think Heche's crash and death was regarded as an innocent accident or foul play? Let me repeat the question. Do you think Heche's crash and death was regarded as an innocent accident or foul play? Leave your answer in the comments right now, and then let's see whether you need to adjust your answer, right, with additional thought. So if your answer is incorrect, please put another comment saying, wow, I learned something, or wow, my initial answer wasn't right. Okay, so let me ask the question in another way. Do you think the circumstances of her death have any legal import? Right, so that's another thing you could ask about Kiely Rodni. That is there any legal thing that you think is going to come out of this? In other words, is someone going to be prosecuted? Is there going to be some kind of court case dealing with some aspect? Right? Well, in the Heche case, of course there is. Because part of what happened was that she seriously damaged private property. So there's definitely going to be legal consequences to this incident, even if Heche is no longer with us. Even if she can't defend herself or plead her case, there's nevertheless a legal consequence to what happened. Now, you can apply the same question to Kiely Rodni. Is there going to be some kind of legal consequence to what happened with her? So just to be clear, no one is saying in the Anne Heche case that somebody gave her alcohol and they are to blame and they try to overdose or anything like that. That's not in the legal thing at all, right? But there is a very interesting sort of sub-intertextuality that is worth looking at, and that I'm not sure too many people have thought about in terms of the Anne Heche case. So if we go as late as September 14th, the mainstream media reported that Anne Heche's estate is facing a major legal fight over the car accident. Who do you think is the suspect or guilty party here? Well, Anne herself, of course. But it's also not quite as simple as that. At one point, Heche was captured on police body cam. Is it their fault that they didn't stop Heche from driving on? I mean, if they had, they could have prevented this inferno. They could even have saved her life. So isn't it the police's fault that they didn't somehow intervene and force Heche to not drive? Is it their fault that she didn't listen but proceeded regardless? Is it their fault that she drove herself away from that particular area? Her family likely hope so, meaning her family likely hope that it is law enforcement's fault in some way, because then their estate can perhaps avoid damages or mitigate what they owe. They can say, you know what, it's not just Anne's fault, it was the duty of the police to stop her and they didn't, and so it's their fault as well, right? Can you see that argument? Do you buy that argument, though? So in broad strokes, was the Heche incident on August 5th foul play or an incident? Now, what's really interesting here is immediately before the crash, Heche went to, I think, Glass Hair Design in Venice, California, right? And she, I think, had her hair done or something. And the owner, a guy called Glass, has been accused by social media that he gave Heche the drugs that caused her death, that he's to blame. And he actually told TMZ, he said, you know, there are people that are nice and then there are people who are just evil. What do you think that comment says about the Kiely Rodni case? Anyway, he went on to say, making accusations that I had something to do with what her toxicology report said, it's just a lot. They're saying that she could have gotten the cocaine or fentanyl from me because I was the last person to see her. I've never done any type of drugs and I don't do that. I'm not that person. But Glass did say, he said he felt guilty about being one of the last people Heche saw, and he said he wondered if he could have done something to help her. And he said, it's been really taxing. He said, I just feel huge remorse. I feel like I could have done something more. End quote. Think about those words. I feel like I could have done something more. Don't you think Glass is the Sammy Smith in the Heche case? He feels responsible. He feels like he could and should have done more. He says so, and then people rush to blame him. But is he responsible for Heche? He's her hairdresser, not her husband. Now, although the incident was an accident, there is nevertheless foul play involved. So if earlier the question was, do you think it was an accident or foul play, and you said an accident, actually there is foul play involved. How? Well, in the sense of damaged property, not in the sense of intoxication or drugs or somebody giving her drugs. There would also be foul play in that she would be guilty of driving under the influence, but because she has died, there's no, she doesn't exist anymore as a legal person, and so those legal arguments fall away. You also can't then, legally prosecute somebody else in the case of someone who has died, right? In the circumstances of a case like this. So the foul play involved is that she damaged property, right? But even though she's no longer alive, that is nevertheless a legal aspect that needs to be dealt with, right? And so if she's no longer alive, who's to blame? Who is going to be held accountable? Where is this person whose property was damaged? Where are they going to get relief? Where are they going to get their situation kind of restored, right? Where are they going to get redress? Where are they going to get restitution? then, and the answer is from Heche's estate. If Heche's died, her estate nevertheless continues. It lives after, right? And then the people who inherit her estate then become those who are either going to defend a lawsuit against that estate, or do you see what I'm getting at? So even though Heche isn't here anymore, there is a legal legacy to what has happened. Does that make sense? So we are going to be exploring the legal intertextualities to the Kiely Rodni case in a separate episode. That's also very interesting. But I think the circumstances surrounding Anne Heche certainly begin to touch on that area too. Do you notice? We've already touched on that. We're going to deal with legal intertextualities in other cases and see how that has a bearing on the Kiely Rodni case. Now I want to circle back to an assumption made by an ex-FBI agent and much of social media, the whoa of the dateless date of death on Kiely's celebration flyer. You know, the woohoo, this is really suspicious. It says that she was born September 1, 2005, and then there's this blank for when she died, sometime in August 2022, right? Now, if you did your homework properly, you'd see that the first flyer didn't come out on September 5th, but September 1st. Look closer. Closer, please. Kiely was found on the 21st of August. The flyer came out on September 1st on the Find Kiely Rodni Instagram page. And the Adventures with Purpose video that influenced the timeline came out the next day, came out afterwards. So it's not that they read anything into what AWP said. It's not that the family watched the video, read something and read anything into it. They weren't influenced by it. They simply didn't know. And the autopsy, I don't think, will confirm time of death either. AWP's video suggesting a completely new timeline doesn't, in my view, shift the timeline whatsoever. But the fact remains that the timeline is uncertain. Vehicle telematics may or may not change that, and we may have our answers in the form of an official report from law enforcement as early as next week. How do we know? Well, on September 14th, so just a couple of days ago, that was Wednesday, the middle of this past week, law enforcement informed News Nation, quote, that they hope to provide an update on the case next week. Well, next week starts tomorrow. They also said that they hope someone who saw something at that graduation party can help lead to answers. That's what they're still looking out for. Now, I think the fact that law enforcement wants information from someone at the graduation party and not from the tow truck guy and not from who the tow truck guy was supposed to see and not from the tow truck guy's supposed witnesses, that tells me law enforcement's focus is still with the party, when it ended, and where the vehicle was, and that timeline, and that part of the sort of lake area. They are not interested in Boca Lake, or AWP, or tow truck guy, or any of the intrigue going on the middle of Saturday. Right? If they're saying as late as September 14th, we would like someone who saw something at the graduation party to come forward, it's because they think something happened at the graduation party, not that something happened the next day. Otherwise, they would be asking about that. Then, why has the Rodni case taken so long? Firstly, because Kiely was in the water for 16 days, and that complicates toxicology considerably, which is to say it delays it. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the length of time is completely normal and natural. It doesn't mean it's taking a long time because there's some FBI investigation for some fugitive who's running around and Interpol is trying to track him down in Europe or something like that. It's completely normal that toxicology takes a while, and the toxicology in this case isn't simple or easy. If you know true crime, you know that toxicology normally takes 4 to 6 weeks. Well, guess what? Today, September 17th, is exactly 4 weeks since Kiely was found. She was found on a Sunday, on September 21st. That was 4 weeks ago today. So we've just moved into the minimum turnaround for post-mortem toxicology. So YouTubers, you guys who want to spin your yarns and grab for, the treasure that you can, that whole around the foul play myth, you've probably only got a handful of days left before the official report comes out. So I think you're going to need to kind of get busy. You'd better make your hay because the sun's about to go down on this case. When the sun does go down, do you think YouTubers will own up to their mistakes? If it turns out to be an accident, do you think they'll say they'll want to spend any time talking about that? Or do you think it's really just about making as much money as you can? As soon as this case is closed, well, then we'll jump into the next case and build the same sensational formula all over again. If that is the case, what do you think that says about the true crime community? If this is what is going to happen each time, what do you think it says about everyone involved? Do you think this is a very self-aware, conscientious, clever community? Do you think this is a community that has critical thinking as a strong point? Or is it a community that's addicted to and insists on being fed tabloid gossip at every opportunity? Well, if that's the case, do you really think it should be called true crime? Shouldn't it be called tabloid crime? We don't really care about the facts, but it's so much fun speculating. The tabloid media also don't care so much about facts. They care how many magazines they can sell. So isn't this tabloid crime? I don't care about the facts. I care about how many subscribers I can get. I don't care whether it's necessarily true or not. The speculation is really interesting. Well, that's tabloid crime. So anyway, as we know, there's been plenty of misinformation pushed out regarding this case, with plenty of channels, most of the channels, the majority of the channels, all repeating the same thing. I don't know if it's out of ignorance, I don't know if it's out of nonchalance, or trying to cynically make money, but around the issue of what normally happens when a vehicle goes into the water, maybe it's time to get some clarity from experts besides AWP. Are AWP really experienced enough to make expert calls on that score? They say they are. What do some other people say about that? So we'll look at another dive team in the next episode who have a totally different view to AWP's assessment and whether it's foul play. And I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think. So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.